So, Nostalgia Critic is doing a month of Spider-Man movies, but not apparently Spider-Verse, and I'm not sure about the MCU ones, but he's definitely doing all the Sam Raimi ones, and I believe the Mark Webb ones. I'm going to talk about his review of Spider-Man and then Spider-Man 2. Back to back, I took notes so I can remember some of this, but here's the basic thing I think with the Spider-Man reviews. I don't think they're like his worst thing ever. They're not as bad as The Wall, but I think he misses the point of the whole movie. In that, both these are based on Steve Ditko and John Romita's Spider-Man, like the first 100 issues of Spider-Man. It's very clear if you've read Spider-Man comics. He does bring up a good point about the Spider-Man comics with the Gwen Stacy death reference in the first Spider-Man, and he brings that up, and I was like, he clearly understands, like, they used this incorrectly, they just did the reference to do it, it's supposed to be this major moment in comics, and he just sort of referenced it to show, like, hey, we're doing this thing, but they don't fully use that emotional moment the way it's supposed to be used. Now, I agree with that, but he keeps mentioning how it feels old-fashioned and aw-shucksy and Norman Rockwell-ish, but I'm sort of like, dude, like, it's supposed to be like a 60s comic. He's directly influenced by that early Spider-Man run, and that's what that early Spider-Man run was like. Like, there's a part in 2 where there's the same kind of extra person, which he has an issue with extras in, like, people have one line in Spider-Man movies for some reason. He keeps bringing, he's very nitpicky. I've also realized I do not like the nostalgia. If there's any doubt in my mind, like, this did not change my mind on the Nostalgia Critic. But there's this one guy who says, like, your father, you're doing something your father could have never dreamed of. You're, like, winning his legacy. And then later after the explosion, he goes, like, he's ruined his father's legacy. And it's like, that's something Stan Lee would write. Like, Stan Lee's cheesy-ass writing. Like, that's what he did. And that's what these things are influenced by. Like, those kind of comics, that kind of writing, right? And it seems like he doesn't get that, and I don't know how he can not get that if he's read the comics. Just baffling to me. So Doug Walker is clearly, like, does not understand the Ditko Bushima thing, but he also, like, doesn't really bring up that, like, this was very much a post 9/11 thing. He does, but he doesn't bring up how that, like, aw-shucksiness definitely worked for the post 9/11 era. It's kind of the perfect thing we needed. It's almost like he doesn't understand, like, this being a comic book like movie was what kind of influenced the MCU and showed you could bring comic books to the screen and people would accept it in such a way. Because he keeps arguing that, like, oh, this is so cheesy, it should be like real life, but it's not supposed to be like real life. You know, it's supposed to be like this weird comic booky world. So him not understanding that, I don't think he gets, like, the whole crux of it. And I also don't like, as someone who read comics from when I was like 7 to like 7, like when my dad bought comics, and, like, I read a ton of comics, like, every day through elementary school and middle school, like tons and tons of comics. I sort of don't like when people go, oh, I'm a male, so I understand comic books, and I feel like he does that a lot. And it's kind of infuriating because I'm just watching it, like, I don't think you really understand Spider-Man overall. I think you just assume because you're a boy you get Spider-Man, which is, like, insulting and very the white privilege that Doug Walker is. But anyway, he does actually have some funny jokes. I will say he has some funny observations. Some weird things is, like, he keeps bringing up how Willem Dafoe is doing a riff on Christopher Walken. I don't really get that, but okay. Doug Walker does have a funny joke about Willem Dafoe when it fills up with green smoke during the Green Goblin thing. He said he's getting funneled in all his farts from the lighthouse. I was like, that's a good joke. There are a couple of good jokes he had. He also doesn't really understand how actors work, like the whole thing about the 100 takes with the lunch tray scene. He's like, it would be like that Rick and Morty thing, and he'd be screaming. I'm like, they're professional actors, Doug. Like, they're trained not to freak out like that. Like, that's why they're actors. I don't think Doug actually gets into a movie. Like, he's so nitpicky with it. I'm like, do you ever just sit back and just, like, let the movie happen and later you think about your thoughts? It feels like he's just so ready to have a criticism. He's not really thinking about experiencing the movie and then having... You're supposed to have a criticism about the whole experience of the film. You're not supposed to go through every fucking stupid moment and just, like, criticize everything. Part of the problem I have with Doug is he didn't really understand criticism before he became a critic, and he came up with this weird amalgamation of, like, piecing through the plot. And there's often times where I'm like, you're just nitpicking on anything you can find, and you find that through both these reviews. He made a joke about, oh, they put Craigslist in newspapers, but it was like, I'm half not sure if that's a joke. He mentioned a couple times that the internet had an issue with the Tobey Maguire casting. I was reading, like, all the movie sites. Everyone was happy about that, as I recall. Nobody hated Tobey Maguire was pretty liked, so I'm a little confused. I guess he was just like, oh, that's what you're supposed to say about internet casting, so it's... Also, the thing with the J. Jonah Jameson thing, and anyone having any hard times in these movies, like, emotionally, he, like, criticizes them, and he, like, goes like, oh, that's not what you should have do, and, like, nitpicks them, especially people in a crisis and how they react to things, like when he's finding the guy who he thinks killed Uncle Ben, and he's not, like, seeing his face and all the things. I'm like, no, he's clearly, like, freaking out because his uncle just got killed. Like, have some, like, emotional understanding of what's going on with people, which he doesn't seem to have, which was just so weird, because it just feels like he, like, is so ready to nitpick these performances. He's not thinking about those things. But I also, one of the things I think about the original Spider-Man movie, which he doesn't say, is that the original Spider-Man movie, people let go of all those things because comic book movies, like, just did not work. Like, the first Bryan Singer X-Men has all these issues with it. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie was, like, such a breath of fresh air in terms of understanding comic book logic and all these things. And he doesn't really kind of understand the context of what he's talking about a lot of the time. So he's just, like, throwing out all this stuff, but I'm like, and talking about how he was, like, too serious for this sort of stuff. But it's like, that's not what this movie was trying to do. It's dumb to come at a movie with something that it doesn't do and doesn't even try to do and criticize it for it, because, like, that's not Spider-Man. It's not trying to be Blade. It's not trying to be Frank Miller. It's trying to be this certain thing, and your rejection of it just seems odd to me. There's a lot of things about Doug Walker I don't like, but his misunderstanding of criticism as a whole is one of my biggest things. He just doesn't really seem to understand the whole evolution of comic book movies, and how, like, literally at the time people were like, oh my god, this totally happened, was kind of one of the big things of the Spider-Man movie. So I don't think he really got that. I don't think it's a perfect film or anything like that, but it seems he didn't understand the 9/11 part. He didn't understand Steve Ditko thing. He didn't really understand the whole context of the movie. He just kind of went in and, like, kind of, like, half watched it and didn't do any research on it, and I guess no one told him otherwise. So this I didn't know, because I never watched Doug Walker unless I'm doing it for these things. But he gives money to charities, like, regularly. Did everyone know this? Like, any money he makes at a con goes to a charity, and he did it at the end of both Spider-Man reviews. Like, he regularly gives money to charity, and apparently a lot of money. I was kind of a little shocked by that. I think that's really cool. You know, I didn't know that. I give him a lot of credit for doing that. I think a lot of us are financially not able to do so. But credit to him for being able to do that. I think that's really cool. So I'm sure some of you did know that, but I you know what, regardless of what I think of him, I think that's a very positive thing. And I'm not going to talk shit about that. I think that's great. So I wanted to say that. So Spider-Man 2. The thing is with Spider-Man 2, he clearly really likes it. He pours on the cheese thing. And it's weird because he doesn't bring up that, like, certain, like, the Spider-Man No More thing is, like, a comic book cover. It's not even an obscure Spider-Man thing. He, again, does not notice that it is directly from a comic, even though he's supposedly read the comics. And it seems like if he has read the comics, he's read the 90s comics, which I've heard people keep telling me on Twitter he likes the Mark Webb ones. I don't know if that's true, but from his review I kind of could tell that. He makes a bunch of mentions of Spider-Man 3. I can tell he really wants to do Spider-Man 3 because that's more of his review. By the way, he keeps making references to the Disaster Artist through James Franco, which is like, I get that you're like, you do bad movies in the room, man, but it's like a little pathetic at this point. He does bring up things that work, like the Alex Ross opening, saying it's one of the best opening of all time. He brings up that it's unrealistic, which I don't get it. He mentions the guy in The Last Airbender in sort of a racist way, which I wasn't really comfortable with. He was bring up how he liked edgier, bloodier stuff, and that's why he didn't like these movies originally. Sort of reminds me of, like, I remember my dad didn't like the original Star Wars because it wasn't complex sci-fi, and I was sort of like, but that's not what it was trying to do. So yes, it would fail under that. But he keeps criticizing extras in this quite a lot, which is like, dude, this was like their one chance of fame. Like, kind of just like be chill about it. Like, it wasn't that bad. He brings up this Darth Vader thing when Dr. Ock says no, that was funny. He actually has good observations. He of course had to bring up the Doctor Strange thing. He brings up the thing with J. Jonah Jameson's son being an astronaut, which, like, that is in the comics. I don't know how to tell him that's not. Again, he should know that. If he read the comics, he clearly didn't. Duh. And he doesn't understand the source material because that is sort of a long thing, and then his son becomes a werewolf or something. Look, that's stupid. Comics are dumb sometimes. It's fine to have that in there and not do much about it, but he keeps bringing that up. It, like, really, there's like nitpicky things. He goes, I mean, some of them are like when the guy at the Daily Bugle looks at Peter Parker like Spider-Man was there, and I think you could read it either way, but Peter Parker is reading it as, oh fuck, does he like, no, I'm Spider-Man? But I think it was more like Spider-Man was there, Parker, what the fuck? But clearly he wasn't going to take pictures of that because that was like emotionally scarring, seeing his mentor like destroyed and all that, but whatever. He actually says this quote, and I think it sums up how he feels about Spider-Man 2. He says, sometimes I don't know what this movie is doing, I just know that I love it. It sort of sums it up. Like, he kind of doesn't fully rip this movie apart the way he originally did, and I find sometimes with his movies of classics that he doesn't really want to rip apart, but he likes, but isn't as passionate about. Because that's one thing I've noticed through watching these two. It feels like he's passionate about a certain amount of movies, but he's not really passionate about film as a whole. I've noticed he like, I feel most critics will just be like, this movie is a good movie, and I'm so happy I saw a good movie. And it feels like because it doesn't hit his various rules or whatever, even if it's good, he's like kind of begrudgingly gives it a good review, and I kind of felt that throughout this thing. Although he did have good things to say, but then he's like bringing up jokes too much that have like literally nothing to do with anything and aren't even that funny. The astronaut thing. But he did notice that like Thomas Jane has a cameo in the end of Spider-Man 2. Never knew that. I've seen Spider-Man 2 is one of my favorite movies of all time. I've seen it a million times. And he brings up the emotional big parts of it. But he is so looking forward to Spider-Man 3. I think he knows that's going to be a big video for him. I would say the problem I have with Doug Walker on these Spider-Man reviews is he sort of misses the point of what these films are. They're trying to represent the original Spider-Man run. They're trying to represent the Steve Ditko run. And they're doing a specific thing. And also it's like Sam Raimi. He gets some of that with the Doc Ock thing with the arms and the Evil Dead references. But Sam Raimi likes classic films and aw shucksiness. And I get that that isn't like the realism he necessarily likes, but first off, film isn't realism. Film is like, you know, performance, and I don't really want to get into that. But he just doesn't understand what these movies are, and he misunderstands that completely. And I feel like that's why kind of like these reviews are a little cringy and not really what good criticisms of the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans, because he's not really getting into what these movies are. He's getting into his very skewed experience of it, and I don't really honestly find that entirely very insightful, much like how I feel about him in general anyway. Alright, so sorry. Let's get into questions. Oh man, Saber, that's a good question. Saber Sparks asks, Jim, question. You get $1 million, but you have to collab with the Nostalgia Critic on a video each week for a year. Oh my god, with him in charge, and he stays at your house in a bunk bed with you? Why does it have to be that part too? That's weird. I don't like that part. Well, $1 million is worth it. Sure. I guess I'll do that. Yeah, do I get top bunk? I think I would want top bunk in that situation. I don't think my wife would be into this idea, though. Why would he want to collab with me? Would I have to be in the video? I guess I'd have to be in the video with him. Ugh. I feel like, though, I could do a better job than... What's that guy? The guy who reviews, like, bad movies or whatever. I feel like I could do better than him. I think he writes for him. I feel like I could do better than that. Because there were times like, I feel like someone could be like, no, don't do that, Doug, do this. But if I had to be there with him, part of me died with that question. Saber, why did you do that to me? No, I don't know. I probably would have to do it, and I'd feel really bad. I would say I would do it. I would do all that, but I have to react to not liking him the entire time. I would be like, what? I don't know. And I would insist we review his own movies, and he gets to hear what I think about them. I would also say he has to be on the Pizza Party podcast, and Linkara has to too. If it's $1 million, I'm throwing out the negotiations. I want Linkara on the Pizza Party. Also Doug Walker. And Doug Walker would have to Pizza Party with me at least 4 times that year. I think that's... Did someone write Doug Walker as a class traitor? God, I want that shirt. Anyway, thank you for that, Saber. That is now my current nightmare, because I would definitely do that. I'm depressed. Alright. Okay, so Spider-Man 3. So I wanted to talk today, during my only segment today, is I wanted to talk about Doug Walker's, or a Nostalgia Critic's review of Spider-Man 3. Now, before you ask, I did actually watch the first viewing when Doug and his brother were watching Spider-Man 3. What I find sort of interesting, well, not really interesting, but odd about the Nostalgia Critic is so many times when he reviews a movie, his thoughts are spread out actually in so many different videos. Like, just for one of these Spider-Man videos, sometimes he'll have a first viewing, an actual Nostalgia Critic video, and then a making of. And then sometimes he's had a previous thing or a previous discussion or a previous video. And I just think, like, that's not what a review is. Like, most of the time when you go, I want to know this critic's review of a movie, I'm not going to listen to their podcast also. They might say, well, I have an additional thoughts on this theory that doesn't fit in a review. That's fine. But it feels like there's other things that should go into the review that aren't getting there. And it's already like, Nostalgia Critic reviews are pretty long for reviews of movies anyway. So it's like, the whole thing is, that whole concept is bizarre to me. I have to say, there's just like way too many. But, and I feel like he was more negative on it, although he highlights even in the first watch that there are parts of it he likes, particularly the Sandman, when Sandman realizes he's been transformed into the Sandman, I guess. Like, that's a beautiful scene, and I agree with him about that. And there's certain things, like, he's very consistent about. If you watch all three, which now I have, he continues, like, jokes going on between these three films, so I think he kind of almost understands that there are a lot of people who are going to watch all three. And I will also say, I haven't reviewed a ton of Doug Walker content, but of his reviews, I guess I've done The Wall. This would be like the fourth one I've done. This is probably the best thing I've seen from him in a long time. It just seems so ready for him, and it felt like he kept hinting about Spider-Man 3 like the entire time he was talking about the other two. Like, he hinted at, not the entire time, but he hinted at it several times, because it feels like he really wanted to do that. And that feels like ready for his kind of skill set. But what's interesting is, in this review, the whole kind of crux of this review is the idea that he wants to say, hey, I don't think this movie is absolutely terrible. There's some interesting, I think there are parts that are ridiculous and terrible. It's different than how everyone else perceives it, and almost how the internet expects the Nostalgia Critic to sort of just rip this up. And he has, like, him in the J. Jonah Jameson outfit, and his, like, other actor people he employs, and they're kind of going, like, they're kind of representing, like, the people who expect him to just rip it down, and then him acting like, well, there are parts I like, and I like this part, and things like that. So it's actually sort of an interesting idea, I will say. It's probably the only concept I've seen him do well since I've seen him doing these Spider-Man reviews. I'm actually kind of surprised how good he is at doing that. And he sort of over-defends it, but I will say most of the Thomas Hayden Church stuff is good in this movie. I will agree with him on that. But his whole thing with, like, so in this, when he has this whole idea, this whole thing where it's like what the internet wants him to do versus how he sees the movie, Doug Walker plays J. Jonah Jameson, who represents the internet, which is, like, sort of interesting and funny, but also sort of just stupid. And him in the weird hair and everything, it's quite a thing, and he's very much into it. I get that there's certain people he wants to do, and he wants to do all these characters and impressions. And it does feel like if anyone has a cool performance, he wants to do that. But it just felt like a little too out there, but I will say it sort of worked in the crux of everything that was going on. But he just thinks J.K. Simmons is really cool. But he doesn't really talk about it much within Spider-Man 3, really, but whatever, because this is kind of mild. It was actually a decent review, but in terms of his reaction to it, it's sort of like, hey, there are good things. And I agree, that's sort of the weird thing with Spider-Man 3, where there's, like, the Thomas Hayden Church stuff is interesting, and it'll have this shot that you like, and that shot that you like, and things of that nature. It doesn't all work. There's, like, too many weird kind of things going on. So it's sort of like, I used to think the movie would work. If you took out a certain thing and put this in, then the movie totally works. That's what I used to think. And I was totally wrong. That's not true. That does not work. I don't know why. Like, there's no way you could save it. It's so unwatchable and horrible. But I do think if he actually likes Amazing Spider-Man 2, I would find that to be bizarre, because that is, like, really bad. I think Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3 are kind of like neck and neck, I'd say the worst. I'm not sure which one. 2 might even be worse than 3. I haven't seen 2 in a while. Amazing Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 is great, but anyway. But I agree with them. All the Thomas Hayden Church stuff was really good. And I wish it had just been a movie about Thomas Hayden Church, because it feels like Sam Raimi had a good Sandman movie in him, but instead we get this dumb thing. But he also kind of gets into, like, how some of the special effects are bad, but sometimes they're actually kind of neat and cool. Like a lot of those shots where, like, you know, with Bryce Dallas Howard, where, like, the camera pulls out when, like, the building's crashing. I'm like, I agree with him there. I think one thing the Nostalgia Critic did really well in this is highlights how this movie has some really bad stuff, but there are actually some cool stuff in it as well. Or even James Franco being kind of fun in this movie, kind of like trolling and like definitely having a lot. I mean, I think Franco is usually pretty good in this, probably better in the sequels than the first one, but he's really good in this movie actually, and it feels like he's actually having fun. Like, I don't love his kind of review style, but I have to give him credit after watching some of these. Maybe I'm kind of just gotten so drunk on the fact that I'm watching Nostalgia Critic more to do these reviews. Me reviewing the Nostalgia Critic, reviewing Spider-Man movie series, I guess, that I'm doing on this show. So next week we're talking about Amazing Spider-Man. But I did think, so he does this ad break in the middle of the video, and he did one for stamps.com. And before he says, like, stamps.com always asks me to they always send me a script, but they're like, put your own spin on it and stuff like that. But he said the script they sent is pretty funny considering coronavirus, and it was actually a good bit he had going, because he brings up, like, how they said, don't you want to avoid the post office? And he's like, right now, yeah. And it was like, I was like, oh, yeah, it was actually funny. It was like the funniest part of the video was him reading a regular stamps.com ad. It was actually like a funnier bit. I was actually surprised how good he was at doing this. I think it's almost like I've always heard when he steps up his game, it gets like weird and stupid and doesn't make any sense. And this is like one of the few times I've seen him step it up in a way that I was like, oh, this actually worked. I still think that the thing with the best black suit one was from Spectacular Spider-Man. One of my least favorite things about this black suit movie in Spider-Man 3 is that they never really got into the kind of dark side of it, really. And the black suit didn't even look that different. Like, it just looked like what if they made the Spider-Man suit but black, and it's like more than that, frankly. He also, why does he bring up Rick and Morty so much? It's like embarrassing. It's like your cousin who you're like, oh yeah, I like animation. Have you seen Rick and Morty? And you're like, dude, just stop making Rick and Morty jokes. Like, everybody likes Rick and Morty, but like, he just says it a lot. It's like he clearly very much likes Rick and Morty. He also admits the room thing in here. It's also interesting. So Nolan brought up that, if you saw Nolan and I on Twitter, there's a part where, when Tobey Maguire is doing his whole like crazy dance thing in the jazz club, not the dance thing outside, which is also crazy, but the dance thing inside, that he basically says the people who are really selling this are the black extras, and he like gives them the award, and Nolan said that Doug Walker ended racism. He does an even worse thing in this when he does like a black guy voice in the middle of it, which I'm surprised Nolan didn't notice. I don't know. I should have called him about it. And he also does a Trump diss, so like Doug Walker's getting political. He likes the Venom in this, which I'm like, no. So I will say, I just like don't like Tobey Maguire's Venom. It doesn't work for me. I know he was like, well, it's sort of a different Venom, which is like, I get where he's coming from, but no, I don't think. I think in some ways this movie was more close to Doug Walker's skills as a critic, and worked for more what works for him, and I think that's why maybe this review worked better for him. Like, I expect his Amazing Spider-Man 2 review to be probably better than his Amazing Spider-Man 1 review, because he's much better at doing bad movies, and he actually is self-critical, bringing up how he brought up the room thing. He's like, why does that keep happening? And like, he seemed like almost like because the interesting thing about him in this series, other than The Wall, is everyone hated The Wall. But there's no The Wall 2. So he can't make a review of The Wall 2 and see what everyone thought of him and then do anything with that. He's just sort of like, I don't, what is he going to make a, musical review of like the Fame or something? Like, there's like no connection between The Wall and anything. So in this, he can like see where it's going and see where the audience, and like, I think the interesting thing about a franchise often, any franchise where you're doing a series, is you see where the audience is taking it, and it seems like he took that in, and especially he was really considering the audience in this, and I think that actually turned out to be one of his better, sort of overall kind of a better review from him, to be honest. I'm not a fan of him. I don't think it's like the greatest review of Spider-Man 3. I myself actually have not reviewed Spider-Man 3 because I was waiting for the MCU Spider-Man 3 to do that, but I have to give him credit, because I think this sort of, all his hype for this happening. I wanted him to do the Nostalgia Critic, do the walk, like the walk around thing, and do like going out of the room and doing the dance thing. I mean, even Trailer Drake did that. Why can't Doug Walker do that? I don't understand that. This worked better for him, so I can't really knock him for that. I think this is probably the Nostalgia Critic review of like the most as of late, but we'll see how he goes. I'm really curious to see, because he likes the Mark Webb films, and I don't like how he praises, like, he thinks like more realism and stuff works, because like Spider-Man isn't like a realism character, and I'm like, you don't even like it's not like Doug Walker likes like kitchen sink like dramas or something. So I find it weird. It just feels like a very nitpicky thing that doesn't really make any sense when you think about it. But regardless, I thought he actually did a good job with Spider-Man 3, which is a better job than anyone who actually worked on Spider-Man 3 actually did. This is the only segment where I review a Nostalgia Critic review. I'm only doing this for the Spider-Man ones. I don't think I'm going to do it past that, because as much as people like these, I think, as I've said before, I'm only doing these. I'll probably only talk about Nostalgia Critic when he does like something super embarrassing, and you don't need to say he does that all the time, okay? We're going to move on after this point, but I'm just sort of doing these because I'm more invested in the Spider-Man movies, and his views on them is weird. So anyway, the Nostalgia Critic on Amazing Spider-Man. I guess we've known for a while that he prefers the Mark Webb films, which is an interesting take, I guess. He came out first, he has that weird thumbnail. All the Spider-Man thumbnails have been, I feel like he's kind of antagonizing the audience, because you're like, are you asking us to get upset? Is that what's going on here? This one felt different, because I feel like getting on your high horse about Amazing Spider-Man is like one of those things that, one, I don't respect that opinion at all. I think it's pretty stupid. Like, who cares? Like, it's such a nothing movie, and even he mentions how it's inconsistency, particularly the Flash Thompson character in this is like really inconsistent, pretty wildly inconsistent a lot of the time. But I did watch his first viewing thing on this, and it does seem like he's already ready to go, like, I think these are better, and you can see they're bringing in MCU stuff, and I'm like, dude, like, this is the same summer of the Avengers that this came out, which again, like, I really noticed that he does not talk about context in these Spider-Man movie reviews, which is sort of interesting, because you think, like, hey, what changed between Spider-Man 3 and Amazing Spider-Man? Oh, sorry, the MCU. That's not a big thing or anything, and he doesn't get into that. He does get into the fact that this was made mainly for a contractual reason. They lose the rights to Spider-Man, so they had to do it. He says basically he's supposed to give his honest thoughts and a unique point of view, is what he said. I don't know if this is unique, because I find it a really boring point of view, because you're sticking up for like a not great Spider-Man movie. And he does bring up that it kind of lives in the shadow of the Raimi films. I like that he acknowledges that this is a hard time living up to that movie. But the other thing is, like, I always thought that he does also kind of bring up that he almost understands this movie better, but I also think, like, he's not as good at reviewing, like, movies he thinks that are good, necessarily, other than the Secret of NIMH video, which I've brought up before, where he explains all the lore of it. In this, it's like, he doesn't feel like he's having as much fun. Again, I don't know if he really, like, loves movies, which, a lot of people told me to suck their dicks on my YouTube comments, so I think clearly people don't like me having that opinion. But I just find, like, defending this movie boring. Because, like, what are you defending? I always felt this movie was like, if you remember Glee, like that kind of worldview of high school, which is really inaccurate, like having bullies who'd be like, hey man, there's a line. I'm like, most bullies I know were just cruel, evil people. Like, I didn't know these bullies that had like a social conscience. I like 21 Jump Street kind of like made fun of that, but in this it like treats it like this is what high school's like, and it's like, I don't know. And it's like based on 90s Spider-Man, which is like not known for like its best written stuff, so like, I don't know, everything about Mark Webb is weird. One of the things I did notice about this one is all the other Spider-Man reviews have skits and other actors in it. I have two feelings on this. One, there's the coronavirus, so maybe he couldn't do that. Maybe he literally couldn't have people around, do the sick. They couldn't find a way to do it, and he just kept his employees home. I'm going to give him the credit that maybe he did that. Who knows? So it did feel different from the other ones. It felt more low-key than all the other Spider-Man reviews, particularly as this is in a series. I'm assuming he's going to do that with 2 as well. But the fact that he either kept everyone home or they wouldn't come in, maybe, I don't know. It does feel a little more boring. He also brings up that one of the writers of Ordinary People helped write this film. He kind of acts like they're the only person. There's like a lot of screenwriters who worked on this film. So this review, because you don't have the other actors there, it does sort of emphasize just his point of view. But the problem with this review is that perspective and that point of view isn't interesting. It's like really boring. So you're just like watching this and going like, oh, this is a bad theory and this is all this review has, and we're just like constantly going to it. He brings up that the great power from great responsibility line was so famous from the first movie. I'm like, Doug, like the nostalgia critic doesn't get that, like that's not from the first movie, that's from Spider-Man comics. Like, I know most people learned it from the movie, but it's not from the movie. I don't get, like, he's like, we can't have that because it was famous from the first movie. And I'm like, I get that they did change it and it is very awkward, but it's just like, why do you not... What he understands from the comics and what he doesn't is, like, wildly inconsistent and very confusing. And it makes me think, like, a writer gave him a ton of notes and he, like, knocked off ones he wasn't interested in. And he goes, but that's from the comics, don't care, whatever, we're moving on. And that's just the feel I get. I don't know. He does a lot of Bing disses in this, which is funny. He does use Bing a lot, which is true. I like what he said. He did have a good joke in this where he goes, Bing is a search engine you use when you don't want anyone to go through your search history. That was a good joke. I actually like that. He brings up Amazing Spider-Man 2 a lot, and it feels like basically what he did with Spider-Man 3 with the Raimi films, where he brings it up like, hey, you bet you can't wait for me to do this bad movie. I'm the nostalgia critic. I get angry because you don't have to, and stuff like that. And that's like, you know, his thing. I get it. It kind of like emphasizes the point I have that like he only really wants to do the bad ones. So like in a way, like why didn't he just do 3 and Amazing Spider-Man 2? Like, why do these other movies? Like, what's the point if you're just gonna, like, why don't you just do that? I don't understand about that. But anyway. He brings up the thing about Flash Thompson, which I've always had a problem with Flash Thompson in this. I have done a review of this. It'll be, if you're watching this later, it'll be in a card up here somewhere when I make this a separate video. Or it'll be in this at this point. It was a long time ago. I forgot what I said, but spoilers, I didn't like it. But yeah, he brings up Flash Thompson. Very inconsistent in this movie. I really don't like the Flash Thompson in the Amazing Spider-Man movies at all. He keeps bringing up how good Andrew Garfield is in this and how he's like more real. And I'm like, I never felt that way about Andrew Garfield in this. I felt like there's sometimes like his Spider-Man was good. I don't like his Peter Parker because that's not Peter Parker. Like, I knew so many people would go, why have Spider-Man if he's not a nerd? Like, that's the whole point of the character. Like, oh, he's just an awkward web designer. It's like, that's like, make some other crappy character. Like, why ruin Peter Parker in such a way? It doesn't make any sense to me at the time. I don't think he defends it by going like, he has so many nuances when he answers that question. I'm like, really? Like, that's worth ruining this character? I don't agree with that, but whatever. He also doesn't mention that C. Thomas Howell is in this movie a lot. Like, you have to have known that. Like, there's no way he doesn't know that C. Thomas Howell. Anytime I see Amazing Spider-Man on TV, I'm always like, where's C. Thomas Howell? Like, that, to me, C. Thomas Howell is the star of Amazing Spider-Man. And there's just, like, a bunch of other boring crap happens. But, like, C. Thomas Howell, why didn't he bring that up? I will agree with him, the Stan Lee cameo is maybe one of the best. It's really good. I still like that fight scene with Stan Lee in the library. I will agree that's good. This movie isn't, like, the worst Spider-Man movie, but it isn't like one I ever really want to watch or think about again. So this was an interesting review for me. No one who defends this movie makes that much of a better argument. It's just the whole thing with Amazing Spider-Man is they kind of defend like, oh, it's more real, it's more like this, it's so different, but it's sort of like different in this crappy middling studio way that to me it's like when people say that, I don't think they're really smart. I just look at it and go, oh, you have no taste. And to me, like, that's probably the thing with Doug Walker is like, duh, he has no taste. All he really cares about is nitpicking a bad movie. So to someone who nitpicks a movie that's just middling and just like sort of checks all these boxes and crap is a good movie. But like, that isn't a good movie. That's a bad movie. I just don't think the nostalgia critic basically had the problem of everyone who defends the Amazing Spider-Man movie never has a good theory. Their only theory is that this is more real, this is more like a movie, but like, what does that even mean? Like, I think the highly stylized thing is much more of a movie and much more adapted from a specific creator's vision of Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man is just kind of like the basic idea of 90s comics. You're not doing Todd McFarlane, you're not doing the specific Clone Wars, you're not doing Black Suit or anything like that. You're just like kind of the overall vibe of Spider-Man, and that's relatively boring. Yeah, so I think in that sense, The Amazing Spider-Man is why those movies didn't hold up for me, and why this review is probably his weakest of all the theory ones, even though it is more just him talking to a camera and none of his over like characters or him dressing up as anything. Because like when you strip all that away, you have to have something. You're basically just showing the core of the review, and when your core is essentially rotten and not holding up anything, it's not really going to work. All right, so I've been doing reviews of the Nostalgia Critic reviews all this month to kind of follow him doing the Spider-Man month, where he reviews every Spider-Man movie from the 3 Sam Raimis and the 2 Mark Webbs, and doesn't get into the MCU or Spider-Verse, although they refer to them a lot. This is the final one that I'm doing of him. I might be doing, again, like, I expect him to do something embarrassing later. I'm sure we'll get another The Wall type thing. Maybe I'll do it then, but it's been fun. I actually kind of find going through him interesting because it kind of shows me his strengths and his weaknesses. And it was also interesting seeing how he even deals with his employees during coronavirus. Because the last one he had nobody in. This one he has his other cast members in. And understanding like his charity stuff he does. Understanding him in a little bit of a different way. I do end up talking about him a bit. And it seems like people want me to talk about him. If he does another Spider-Verse month, maybe we'll talk about it, but we'll see. I don't think he has enough stuff. Probably we'll stop talking about him after this on the regular. But thank you if you watch this. I know people like me talking about Nostalgia Critic. I don't know if I love talking about him, but sure. People seem to dig it, so whatever. But I think this is it. This is it for a bit. Probably till like December when I talk about something else. So, Amazing Spider-Man 2. I think the thing about Amazing Spider-Man 2, it's definitely the worst Spider-Man movie. Is it worse than the infamous Spider-Man 3? Not really. No, it is, sorry. Is it worse than Spider-Man 3? It is. But the other reason it's worse than Spider-Man 3 is Spider-Man 3 is funny. There's memes. We can see somebody do the dance. We can, we share it. We laugh about it. We talk about, hey, maybe this could have worked. Thomas Hayden Church was alright. There's like interesting things. It's a discussion movie. Certain movies are fun to talk about despite their quality. Spider-Man 3 is one of those. Amazing Spider-Man 2 is not. And that's sort of the problem with this. Now, I think Doug really had to find a way to make this interesting. And his kind of whole theory on this one has more of a whole crux of like the cast members and like is more similar to his Spider-Man 3 review in that he uses the cast members. Spider-Man 1, it seemed like he just wanted to be by himself. Whether that was because of COVID or not, that's just me theorizing. I really don't know. But it's not a bad theory, let's say. First, he has this Toonami thing at the beginning, which was like an April Fool's joke, which is the one guy wearing the Toonami guy's suit and stuff. That was all right, I will say, Nathaniel Foga. Whatever. It was kind of like a random, like, hey, nostalgia, and that was it. I did notice he very much is trying to kind of claim, and a lot of people through this one, that there's kind of moments that could have been something. I have never bought that, and I don't believe that, and I think they're just kind of grasping at straws to explain a kind of subpar movie that was like whatever, and sort of like acting like, what if we had made a better sequel to that, we would have liked these movies. I'm like, no, they're like mild at best, so like whatever. He even claims a certain point where like Spider-Man is wearing like, he's in the Spider-Man suit and he's wearing like, a hat, a hoodie, and all this stuff that was right out of Spider-Verse. I'm like, I guess, but not really. And then they have the whole idea with the Lady Doc Ock from Spider-Verse, and she makes a humanized version of the movie Amazing Spider-Man 2, and he's like complaining like, look, there's parts that are good and all this stuff. But I think the problem with this again is like, you're sort of like, this movie is such a mess. You're sort of just overly explaining like everything that doesn't work about it, but it's not funny. It's not fun, and I think the Nostalgia Critic, like the best one of these of the reviews, was Spider-Man 3, because there's a lot to joke about. There's meme potential. He's ready to go with it, and in this, it's just kind of like sort of sad because like even like I will admit this is a major step down for these films. Huge step down. Like remarkable. Horrible step down, like you fell down all of the stairs kind of step down with this movie, and it's like not even fun to go into, so there's not much fun you can really do with it. So I understand why I did this humanized version of Amazing Spider-Man 2. It probably gave him like a little more material and things to cut to. It honestly wasn't that funny, but he does acknowledge that this movie isn't really that great. He kind of brings up kind of the jokes he's been going through this whole series, bringing up the Maguire memes thing a lot, but he keeps bringing up Amazing Spider-Man 1 like he showed potential in it. I never really buy that. It was also interesting as I've gone through that, and then he sort of admits it's the worst Spider-Man movie, and it's kind of like the Doc Ock lady made the humanized version of Spider-Man to like torture a Spider-Man, and she made this fake Spider-Man, and just him reviewing and hating on Spider-Man. But I think one of the things I find odd about the Nostalgia Critic is when he does these bad movies, he really brings up this whole idea of like when he destroys the movie, he really ruins it. And although I think people like AVGN or other critics really go hard on that sort of a thing, Nostalgia Critic never really does. He always does this sort of thing like, well, I'm sort of reasonable, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't go that hard on it, but then like all the actors and the cast members act like he is. And in this, they act like he's going to, even though he admits this is the worst movie, but there's not enough to get excited about. Like, this movie's so bad, you can't really be passionate about it. The only thing you're passionate about is that there are better Spider-Man movies. You're not passionate about your reaction to this, other than, dear God, I want it to be over. And it tried to start this whole cinematic universe, which didn't work. It was like all over the place. He does bring up, I will say, Andrew Garfield is actually a very good Spider-Man in this movie. It's probably his best performance as Spider-Man, not Peter Parker, because I don't think he played Peter Parker. He played like Peter, like misunderstood guy or something. It's really stupid. But I don't like this movie. Doug didn't like this movie. I don't think he did an amazing job with this review, but it's sort of a hard film to make a great review of. I've reviewed it before. I reviewed it when it came out. There'll be a card up here when you're seeing this as a video later, and probably on the stream at this point too. If you want to check that out, not like if you're watching it live, but yeah, if someone wants to post that link in there, you can, but it'll be there later. Anyway, sorry. Not to be a total lame person. This kind of comes to the end in sort of like this whole month, this review series he did, ends in kind of like a petered out kind of thing, because it's weird because why he didn't have them last time, let's say it's because of COVID, but then he did have them this time. The girl who played Doc Ock was separated from them, but the guy, he is wearing a mask, so it's not like as horrible as like we always hear he's horrible to his employees. It's not the worst. Like it seemed like he tried to, at least like he's wearing a suit. Maybe, you know, they took precautions. I don't know. They're clearly not in New York. I don't know or care where they live, so maybe it's not as bad there, and it's not to the point where it is here. But yeah, I just find this review was sort of like, I think he wanted it a bit to be like the Spider-Man 3 review, which I think was probably one of his better ones recently, and this sort of doesn't really do that. But it's, I wouldn't say, it's hard to make this movie funny. And I think also the problem with this is there's interesting things to say about this movie in terms of context, in terms of all the different movies they have planned. He doesn't bring up the Sinister Six movie. I think it was an interesting series for him to do. I don't think he thought about how good he is at covering certain movies, and I think that sort of hurt this series. If he had just done like the Spider-Man movies he was best at talking about, which is just like the Raimi movies, it seemed like he was more excited for one, but I just didn't care about what he had to say. In this, it just felt like he was like, I have to do this, whatever. And it just sort of peters out at the end, and him kind of coming back with the cast and everything like that. And it was just kind of like, sure, with all that. And then we kind of you just kind of leave it, and hopefully I won't have to talk about him again. I did notice a few people brought up in the comments that apparently he had heard the "with great power comes great responsibility" from the comics in a different video. And that's kind of my other problem with him, is he reviews a movie in like so many different videos, and it's hard to grab all this info. But it was someone who liked the Nostalgia Critic more. It's not someone I usually have in my comments. It was someone who brought up that he had heard it, but they took my side, basically. And they're not someone who watch my videos normally, or maybe they do. But bringing up that I was right, he didn't act like it came from the comics, but he had heard it before. And that's sort of interesting, that even his fans are like, well, they do know it, but they forgot that. And it just, that's strange to me. He's so inconsistent and so odd, and doesn't use context. I question how he works as a critic, but I was thinking about, when a couple people brought up, could you review Lindsay Ellis's Cats video, which I think is a good video. It goes through the whole history of Cats. I think it's a fairly great Lindsay Ellis video. But she brings up how she's friends with other critics, how she reads other critics, how she reads theory and all these things. And I think of Todd in the Shadows, and I know he reads stuff, and his rap critic, which Ryan got me into, and I've been watching. Thank you, Ryan. And even Rocked and all these guys will read and research and understand the context and explain the context, even if it's in a joke. You understood they did a certain amount of research. And I don't get that from the Nostalgia Critic. And I think if I were to, like, let's say for real, we make a lot of jokes, Saber made that joke. What if I were to, like, write for him? I would 100% say, like, put the context in your reviews. He could get to, like, maybe a bit better of a level than he currently is. But he's just trapped in his own stupid context. And let's be honest, that doesn't hold as much water as it used to. And I think that's ultimately, like, if I'm going to have a whole thesis of watching these, his biggest problem is acting like his context in what he is doing is really that great, and not finding a way to back up his argument other than like, yeah, I've seen it and this is my thing and I'm this laid back guy. I just don't think like really works anymore, and it clearly doesn't ultimately work for his reviews, which shows why people are sort of sick of him, why he's embarrassing, and why ultimately he couldn't really come up with a great review for a movie that's pretty unremarkable and terrible in itself.